So what do you think is different today than like, sorry, what part do you mean it wasn't this way for all of history? Because wouldn't you say for most of history, men like were the head of their household, like they did provide to some extent? I know there was the dowry that women brought, but it came
Yeah.
from her dad, not her.
Right. Well, like, okay, let's go back to like maybe the 1970s. I wasn't necessarily alive then, but I'm saying
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you talk about, back then it was, make love, not war.
Mhm.
I think that we were kind of like a little bit more headed towards equality back then. I think that okay, look at it this way: you had during the Vietnam War, you had women actually marching for men being sent off to die in war.
Oh, I
So
see. And now today it's like you're not a real man if you don't fight in war. Okay.
not
I
not
see
only
what you're
not
saying.
only that, but I mean, look at the male deletion rate,
Right.
right? And it's like, okay, so why aren't women marching for those lives today?
Yeah, you didn't they do like a million man march a while ago?
You're talking about like in the 90s. I
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
had
I know, that's what I was thinking, like, it was in the night like, no time
yeah. I
recently.
don't think that I think that was more due to police brutality and
Mhm.
and racism and stuff like that. I think it
Mhm.
had more to do with that than it had to do with just kind of like
Oh,
the
really?
as far as I remember, I think it had something to do with like the Rodney King
Oh,
riots and
I
like that.
totally thought it was for men. I don't know, I wasn't a lot, or if I was like 5, so I
Yeah.
don't
Well,
know.
we're trying to, like I said, we're trying to do forensic investigations on what happened in the past and how it correlates in a modern context.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing. Women are so good at rewriting history too. So you have
Absolutely.
to like sift through so many historical documents to even find like I just had This Is Shaw on the channel and he was
Yeah.
talking about the dowry in
Yeah.
depth.
Mm.
And I couldn't believe like why don't conservatives talk about that?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
exactly. And so just more people should ask, like, what is a dowry? And I just did an episode on this,
Mhm.
inspired kind of like by what he was talking about. He actually did a fantastic conversation with Paul Elam about this, bringing this up. And so it's like, okay, when you think about it, some of the most masculine men throughout history, like, Julius Caesar and King Henry VIII, they took dowries. And yet today we're being told that you're not a real man unless you pay 100% of the bills to put the woman in her feminine. So when you talk about rewriting history, this idea that, men just have to, this is the way it's supposed to be, and it couldn't possibly be any other way, even though when you look back in history, it wasn't always that way. So why are we conveniently ignoring those arguments? So I want to see more kind of people being challenged on what they're saying, and not just the feminists, but I want to see, a lot of these influencers and masculinity coaches and pickup artists and stuff like that. I want to see them all get challenged because at the end of the day, we're all just searching for truth.
Mhm.
But I don't like when I ask questions, I'm not necessarily trying to tell people what to think. I
Mhm.
just want them to think for themselves, and I'm trying to extract the truth. And sometimes I have a perception of what I think the truth is, but by no means am I saying I have all the answers. I'm just, go ahead and change my mind. Let's try to figure this out. But these are real issues and these are real problems, and we want to have real solutions and not just sit here and try to sell people a fantasy that is unattainable.
So, how do you think childcare should go? So, like, you get past you go 50-50 on the relationship. Now you're both working. The kid's under 3. You need
Mhm.
someone to watch him who does it.
Well, I mean, I know there's with the tender years doctrine, and people typically go to the idea that women are better
I don't think
caregivers.
that. So,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
obviously, if women
Yeah.
are having abortions and stuff, I mean,
Yeah.
do they really?
I'm just
But
curious because you were saying um, you'd like to see some of the masculine duties be challenged. And so
okay,
I was just curious how you would see the like young years of a kid going.
I think. Well, I think that men can be good fathers if you know it really just comes down to who has the opportunity to be um, to who has the opportunity to be present, who wants to be present, and who
Mm.
wants to have a strong connection with their children. I haven't really thought that much about it, to be honest. I
Okay.
think that it's something that like someone said to me, okay, who would you trust running a daycare center? A bunch of women or a bunch of men, right? And automatically, most people assume that, I would leave my child with a bunch of women instead of a bunch of men,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, I'd trust the men more.
Really? Okay.
Well, just because I've looked at like child abuse stats,
Mhm.
like women are more violent towards kids.
Okay. Well, like I said, that's something that obviously, should be looked at more. So,
Yeah, okay. I was just curious because it's like under 5 who like I mean, once they're in preschool and up, it's like a different story where both parents can work, but I
mhm.
think one parent has to, I'm not saying it should be the man or the woman, but I was
Mhm.
just kinda
Well,
curious.
I've had a lot of women say things like, now that women are expected to be breadwinners along with the men, women almost feel like, oh, well, we have to, uh, be the homemaker, the caretaker, and also make money. And the men are just, the breadwinners. So the men need to step up more and help us more around the house. I think kind of where we're headed is kind of everyone's kind of going to be expected to do everything.
Mhm.
But it just depends on what's more convenient. Obviously, if a woman is pregnant, then it makes sense for the man to definitely step up and, help her. But at some point,
My mom ran a marathon 6 months pregnant. I think they over exaggerate
well, I
that
mean,
too.
to a degree, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that obviously, someone wrote a really excellent comment that I mean, I
Well,
learned more things from my comments as well. But someone wrote that a an employer is going to basically expect a woman to get back to work after 12 weeks.
mhm.
So at some point, you know, why can't a husband do that? Because women, what's the question I had? It was like, why are women more willing to submit to their
Yeah.
employer than they're going to submit to their husband and children? So,
Mhm. So, what do you think, you mentioned that you'd like to see some things change in the space.
hmm.
What are they?
There's too much blame on men, and I think there's too much focus on masculinity and not enough focus on the misandry. And whenever we do talk about misandry, we only talk about the misandry that comes from women. We don't talk about the misandry that comes from other men. We look at shaming women as hate, but when we shame men, it's motivation.
Mhm.
And I think, why aren't they both hate? Why have we come to assess the average man as unacceptable and he has to change and improve? What's wrong? I mean, I get it. Like, I'm not against the idea of self-improvement. I'm not telling men like be a loser and don't ever, achieve anything. But, you know,
Like,
sometimes,
men have a right to enjoy life. They don't
yeah.
they yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, I see rants online from guys who are good looking guys and shouldn't even have a problem. And they're exhausted. They run into burnout because they feel like, it's never gonna be enough.
Mhm.
And so, and the other thing is, it's like there's this idea that just because, men are appreciated, somehow that validates a lot of the sacrifices that men are expected to make. And I think that, we can't just like why would women appreciate the sacrifices that men make if they're just going to continue making those sacrifices?
Mhm.
So I think that either women have to have a duty or neither one of them have to have a duty or something like that. But it's the double standards in our society that persist that, have to change. And what's interesting is it's like, well, why does the manosphere complain about double standards, but then just say, well, men and women are different?
Mhm.
Well, then, so are you saying double standards are okay? So there's a lot of contradictions I see in the manosphere that I'd like to challenge them on.
Mhm.
But then if I call out the manosphere for some inconsistencies, then they're going to label me a feminist and say, I'm
I
clearly
would
not a
love to
feminist.
have you done a back and forth with Myron ever? Have you ever, like, done a debate or
Not really.
I would
It's
love to I think he'd maybe do it. It would I would love to watch it just
yeah,
as a viewer because I
yeah,
know he does a lot with his call-in shows where he
right.
tells them to,
Mhm.
I watched this one and this is not me throwing shot at him. I like Myron. He's a good guy. But
Okay.
I saw him, do a call-in show where, um what was it? He had a couple on the show
Mhm.
and they both made money. And he
Mhm.
basically told, the girl was a little bit ahead in her career because she was like military or something.
Okay.
And he was telling the guy that he wasn't doing enough. But I was looking at her, I'm like, she's fat.
Yeah.
Like you can
Right.
I was like, I'm like, she's got to get on the tread. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before we're gonna say she deserves do you know what I mean? I'm like, she's got to be in shape to at least like.
Well, that's the thing. When you're talking
And-
about all the expectations placed on men, you
Yeah.
gotta be jacked and you gotta be 6 feet tall and six figures, and it's like, well, women can't even do the bare minimum and just be,
like eat less.
Yeah,
We don't even
well-
have to work out. We just have to eat less.
right. Is it harder to grow muscles or just not overeat?
Yeah.
Or is it harder to lose weight or gain height? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there are things that men are shamed for that we can't even control.
Mhm.
Women have more control over the things that, that we shame them for. I mean, obviously when it comes to like men being shamed for being incels and women being shamed for being sluts, women control their body count way more than most men do because women are the control access.
Yeah.
The gatekeepers and stuff. But as far as the other thing also, I think that there's this concept going around the manosphere called hoflation, right? Men today have to work 5 times harder than their grandfathers did, for women 20 times worse than their grandmothers were. And yet, if we're telling men that women have these delusional expectations, now go out and fulfill those delusional expectations, are we not feeding the very hoflation problem that we're complaining about?
Yeah. I just think there's always going to be guys that are like, that's my only choice. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't. I'm
Right.
really not here to tell guys how to date. I've never dated women, so I just don't have an opinion on like that. But I just, like I've interviewed guys where they're just like I had a friend in London. I'd never met him. He had never had a girlfriend that like expected him to not cheat. Like it was always a one-sided open thing. And talking him out of like, cause he kind of did all the stuff. Like he got the muscles. He was a really successful. I'm not going to say the industry, but he was very like good in his field. And I'm like, if you would tell him, well, you're feeding women's delusional he would say, I don't care. Like I have my 5 women. I do not care.
Right.
And like the way he would, I know him. So what he would say is he'd say something like, well, then why don't I did all this work. Why didn't you do all this work?
Right.
I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm just curious how you would respond to something like that.
I mean, typically, when the man does the work, it's the mindset where why does a society that tells a man he doesn't deserve a woman when he's broke have any right to tell that man he only deserves one woman when he's rich? So the man is going to say, well, I've done the work. Now I'm a high status, high value man.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to exercise my options. And so are women willing to, share those men, or are they willing to settle for more average men if they want the loyalty? So it's kind of,
I saw this guy, dude. I was like, he would bring like two girls that he was like hooking up with to a party. He just did not care. He's like, leave me.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think that modern women today are almost like concert groupies. They just want to be with a rock star, or they want to be, they want to be that trophy, that arm candy and stuff.
I will say though, I used to think the money mattered more to women than it does. I've seen a lot of women from the show just sleep with like guys in certain positions. Like they really like bartenders. Like aren't club promoters broke? And they're always
well, I mean, so they'll go for a broke Chad, basically, someone who's just a good,
or just in the right like comedians. They're kind of like a lot of them aren't like super good looking, but they're funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that also. It's kind of like when you look at like, the sexiest men alive, we're famous comedians on there and stuff, or, I don't know, but, obviously they've always said that, women love, men who make them laugh. So.
This reminds me of something I saw where it was like, this guy was at a party and he was getting no attention from women and he was like, screw this. So he went and got his guitar and came back. Yeah.
But I mean,
and I'm not saying it's right, but I'm like, the guys that like figure out a cheat code, I'm like, you're not going to talk them out of like 5 women. Good luck.
Yeah. But I mean, but then you talk to these guys who are like passport bros and, they go overseas, and then what I call passport bros is almost like it's a shortcut to becoming a high value man because, your average man is already kind of considered a high value man in the eyes of foreign women. He's already good enough.
Yeah.
And so I think that, that's why you hear these stories about guys going to Thailand and then, they'll get all these matches on a dating app, and then women will drive, 2, 3, 4 hours to come see you and drive you around and take you around and stuff. So it's kind of like that role reversal. Going back to what I was saying about some of the issues I have with
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
manosphere, I kind of believe that a lot of the advice or the prescriptions, even though we're told that red pill doesn't give prescriptions, but I think it does. We're kind of just told move or improve. Be a passport bro or work on yourself. But work on yourself for you, but don't do it for women, do it for you, even though we're not shaming the MGTOWs who aren't even playing the game.
Mhm.
It's like, why aren't we shaming MGTOWs to improve for themselves? Anyway, I think a lot of it's just coping. It's not, it's basically just saying this is what we're kind of stuck dealing with.
Mhm.
Now, you made a great point once where you said, if men had 20, 30 beautiful women in their inbox DMing them saying, let me come over and let me cook for you and massage you and everything, don't you think it would be hard to get a man to commit?
Oh, yeah.
So one,
Impossible. That guy is the guy I know, he's cheating for life. He's like, it's just never gonna happen.
so once again, it comes down to the fact that now that's exactly the position women are in. They have
Yeah.
all these thirsty simps after them. So women are basically have the privilege of being more picky because they have more options.
Mhm.
So, men would probably do a lot of the same things if they had the options as well. I think the problem is the game is so rigged to one side that we just don't have the ability to have any bargaining power. I think that our bargaining chips have been taken away from us. Our bargaining chip used to be the idea that, we were the ones who made the money. But then ever since, women got equal employment opportunities in the workforce and they're taking half the jobs now. You asked this question, if we want men to be providers, are we going to remove equal employment opportunities, which are preventing men from fulfilling the provider roles that we're advocating for?
Mhm.
So women want to have their cake and eat it too, while men can't have a cake or even eat one.
Mhm.
So we have to look at what's going on culturally and within the laws. And I think, we're identifying the symptoms, but we're not looking at the root cause, what's causing these things.